2,800 years ago, a blind poet known as Homer would produce two epic works. The Iliad would tell the tale of the Trojan War, where a great city was conquered by one of the most devious plans in history. But with the Trojans having been defeated, the blind poet would now turn his attention to Odysseus with his second epic, the Odyssey, documenting his journey home. Having constructed the Trojan horse, Odysseus had ensured victory against all odds and proved his reputation as the most cunning of the Greeks. But throughout it all, Odysseus only longed for one thing: to finally return to his homeland of Ithaca, where he could be reunited with his wife Penelope and his son Telemachus. But while his family awaited his return, Odysseus's journey home would take 10 long years, during which he and his crew would have to face the most terrifying creatures known to man. A journey so epic, its tale would be told for thousands of years. This is his story. Odysseus ruled over the Greek island of Ithaca, but had spent 10 long years fighting in Troy to retrieve the Spartan Queen Helen. But with his mission now complete, Odysseus looked to travel back to his homeland where his wife Penelope and his son Telemachus awaited. Gathering his fleet of ships on the Trojan shores, Odysseus would set sail, relieved to be finally returning home. With Troy in ruins, they would first head north to look for supplies, landing on the shores of Ismara, home to the Ciconians, a Thracian tribe who had fought on the side of the Trojans. Gathering the supplies they needed, Odysseus and his men would find themselves under attack from the Ciconians. But overwhelmed by such a large tribe, they were forced to retreat back to their ships. With their journey soon resuming, they would sail south, round the shores of Greece, before heading north towards Ithaca. But as they neared home, a great storm erupted, blowing them off course and towards the island of the Lotus Eaters. Lost and confused, Odysseus and his crew would leave their ships, soon asking the island inhabitants for help and directions. But rather than give them directions, they would offer something instead: the fruit of the island's many lotus trees. Unknown to Odysseus, the lotus fruit contained a powerful drug that made those who consumed it fall asleep, forgetting their past and wanting to stay on the island forever. As several of his crew began to fall down around him, Odysseus would realize the sinister nature of the fruit, quickly forbidding its consumption. Rescuing his sleeping companions, he would carry them to their ships, making a quick escape and heading out to sea. But having been blown off course, Odysseus and his fleet had been at sea for longer than expected, and with them now running low on supplies, they stopped at the first island they came across. They would soon spot a shepherd's camp in the distance, with Odysseus handpicking a small group of warriors to accompany him. Bringing several cases of wine to trade, the famished crew was overjoyed when they discovered a cave filled with abundant supplies of cheese and meat beside the shepherd's flock. The warriors eagerly helped themselves to the provisions, but their excitement was short-lived when the owner of the cave, the enormous Cyclops Polyphemus, returned. Polyphemus, a son of Poseidon, sealed the cave entrance with a massive boulder, paying no heed to Odysseus' pleas that they were there to trade. Ignoring their pleas, Polyphemus seized two of the warriors, crushing them in his powerful fists, before consuming their remains. Each morning and evening, he would return to the cave to feast on the terrified crew, knowing that the odds were stacked against them. Realizing that overpowering Polyphemus was impossible, Odysseus devised a cunning plan to escape. He offered the Cyclops the wine he had brought, suggesting it would help wash down the taste of his friends. Polyphemus, succumbing to the intoxication, eventually fell into a deep slumber. Seizing the opportunity, Odysseus, who had insisted that his name was Nobody, began sharpening a wooden stake he had found in the cave. Approaching the sleeping giant, he plunged the stake deep into Polyphemus' eye, blinding him, but ensuring that he remained alive since the boulder blocking the cave's entrance still needed to be moved. Polyphemus unleashed a scream of agony so loud that it attracted other Cyclopes from across the island. They rushed to the cave, calling out to Polyphemus, asking what was wrong and who was harming him. In response, Polyphemus shouted back, "Nobody is killing me, nobody." Just as Odysseus had planned, the confused Cyclopes left the cave. However, although Polyphemus was now blind, the giant boulder blocking the entrance remained an obstacle for Odysseus and his men. Undeterred, Odysseus devised another plan. The next morning, when Polyphemus moved the boulder to let his sheep graze, he would feel each animal as it passed to ensure no humans were escaping. Odysseus and his men tied themselves to the undersides of the sheep, remaining undetected as they passed by. Finally reaching their ships, they managed to escape the island with Polyphemus hurling boulders in their direction as they sailed away. Yet, Odysseus made a costly mistake in his triumph. Overcome by his achievement, he revealed his true name to Polyphemus, declaring himself as Odysseus, the renowned hero of the Trojan War. Unbeknownst to him, this revelation allowed Polyphemus to inform his father, Poseidon, the god of the sea, about the identity of his attacker. In revenge for his son's blinding, Poseidon cursed Odysseus, condemning him to lose all his crew during his future travels and wander the seas for 10 long years before he could set foot on his homeland. Unaware of the curse placed upon him by Poseidon, Odysseus and his crew landed on the floating island of Aeolia. After a gracious dinner with their host, King Aeolus, who ruled the island, Odysseus was presented with a parting gift, a leather bag containing the power of the winds. If used carefully, this gift could expedite their journey home. Setting sail once more, Odysseus harnessed the power of the winds, and soon Ithaca, his homeland, came into view. However, as they neared the island's shores, his crew, driven by greed, believed the bag Aeolus had given them contained precious gold and silver. They opened the bag while Odysseus' attention was diverted, unwittingly releasing all the winds at once. The powerful gusts blew their ships back into the ocean, and with their lives hanging by a thread, they found themselves back at the island of Aeolia. This time, their arrival was met with reluctance and refusal from King Aeolus. Recognizing that only divine intervention could have brought Odysseus back, Aeolus refused to aid him any further, fearing the wrath of the gods. Expelled from the palace, Odysseus set sail once again, still unaware of Poseidon's curse. However, misfortune continued to haunt Odysseus on his journey home. Arriving at the harbor of Laestrygonia, he dispatched 3 scouts to search for food and inhabitants in the town. To their dismay, the scouts discovered that they had stumbled upon a land of giants, who mercilessly chased them back to the ships. The bloodthirsty cannibalistic Laestrygonians began devouring the scouts and subsequently targeted Odysseus' ships in the harbor, bombarding them with boulders. All the ships, except one, were destroyed, leaving Odysseus barely escaping with his life. Exhausted and depleted, Odysseus and his surviving crew arrived at the island of Aiaia, where the enchanting witch Circe, daughter of the sun god Helios, resided. Dividing his men into 2 groups, Odysseus remained with the ship and established a camp while the others ventured into the island in search of sustenance. They soon reached Circe's dwelling, where she awaited them. The wolves and lions trembled before her, as she commanded men to join her for a feast. She served them a generous meal of barley, cheese, and wine, concealing a secret ingredient within. Unbeknownst to the men, after consuming the meal, they would fall into a deep sleep and awaken in the form of pigs. However, one man, who had witnessed the events, hurriedly informed Odysseus of his crew's fate. Upon hearing the news, Odysseus set out immediately to rescue his men. Along the way, he was aided by the messenger god Hermes, who provided him with a magic herb to counter Circe's enchantments. Armed with the herb, Odysseus approached Circe and joined her for a meal, surprising her when he remained in his human form. Threatening her with his sword, he demanded the transformation of his crew back into humans. Circe complied, and impressed by Odysseus's bravery, she invited him to her bedchamber. They conceived a son named Telegonus and spent a year together on the island. When the time came to leave, Circe advised Odysseus to visit the underworld and seek the counsel of the prophet Tiresias. Following her guidance, Odysseus traveled to the edge of the world and performed a ritual to summon the spirits of the dead. Tiresias appeared and warned Odysseus of the perils ahead, particularly the danger of the sun god Helios's cattle. If they were to harm the cattle, death would follow. Thanking the prophet, Odysseus set sail, determined to protect his men from the sun god's wrath. As they sailed, they encountered the enchanting songs of the sirens. Remembering Circe's advice, Odysseus had his crew plug their ears with beeswax to resist the allure. However, he wanted to hear the song himself, so he had his men tie him to the ship's mast. Despite his struggle, they successfully navigated past the sirens, who met their fated demise when a mortal resisted their song. At this point, the narrative transitions to a sponsorship message about Masterworks.io, a platform that allows people to invest in art. It highlights the accessibility and potential returns of investing in art. Moving forward in the story, Odysseus faced the perilous choice between Scylla, a multi-headed sea monster, and Charybdis, a deadly whirlpool. He followed Circe's advice and steered his ship towards Scylla, losing 6 of his men in the process. They then arrived on the island of Thrinacia, where Helios's cattle grazed. Despite Odysseus's warning, hunger and a prolonged storm led his crew to kill and feast on the sacred cattle. Zeus, enraged by this act, destroyed their ship with a thunderbolt, and all the crew members except for Odysseus drowned. Odysseus clung to the wreckage for 9 days until he washed up on Calypso's island. Calypso, falling in love with him, kept him captive for 7 years before releasing him due to Athena's intervention. Odysseus faced further trials, including the encounter with the Phaeacians, who helped him return home. Athena disguised him as an old beggar to assess the situation in his palace. Penelope, his faithful wife, had been warding off suitors for years, delaying marriage by weaving a burial garment for Odysseus's father. Recognizing the beggar as Odysseus, she devised a challenge involving his bow, which only he could string and shoot. Odysseus emerged victorious, and with the help. Odysseus's reunion with his father would have to wait, as he had to confront the suitors who had taken over his home. Disguised as a beggar once again, Odysseus entered the palace and discovered that Penelope had devised a clever scheme to choose her next husband. She declared that she would marry the man who could shoot an arrow through a row of 12 axe heads, but there was a catch: each suitor had to use Odysseus's mighty bow that had been left behind. This was another one of Penelope's cunning tricks. One by one, the suitors attempted to string the bow and shoot the arrow, but they all failed miserably, unable to even handle the bow. Amidst the laughter of the palace, Odysseus, still disguised as a beggar, asked for a chance to try. The laughter soon faded as Odysseus effortlessly strung the bow, aimed with precision, and shot an arrow that sailed through all 12 axes flawlessly. Witnessing the devastation caused by the suitors in his home, Odysseus couldn't forgive them. He turned the bow against them, taking aim and striking them down one by one. Panicked, the suitors searched for their weapons, but Telemachus had hidden them while the competition was underway. With Eumaeus joining Telemachus and Odysseus, they launched an attack on the suitors, not stopping until every last one of them was killed. With the bodies of the suitors lying dead at his feet, Odysseus had accomplished his final task. The only thing left to do was to reunite with his wife. Fueled by his unwavering love for Penelope, which had sustained him throughout his arduous journey, Odysseus recognized his overwhelmed wife and embraced her. It was a moment Penelope had faithfully waited for, enduring 20 long years of separation. With a sigh of relief, Odysseus finally found peace. However, Penelope had one burning question for him: where had he been all this time? With a mixture of joy and sorrow, Odysseus smiled and tears welled up in his eyes as he replied with a simple line: "Where do I begin?"